My name is Michael Goff, and I'm Principal Product Marketing here at Revenera, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Beyond Good, Better, Best, Monetizing Intelligent Devices with Subscriptions, Usage, and AI. We have two fantastic guests joining us today. We have Philip Daus, partner at Simon-Kucher, and Peter Loft, product owner for digital supply chain at Schneider Electric, and I am really looking forward to our conversation today. Before we get started, though, I'll just go over a few quick housekeeping details. First, today's discussion will be roughly 30 to 35 minutes. We hope that you have a lot of good questions and comments, and if you do, please add them into the chat tab, and we'll answer them as we go along or at the end if time allows. And if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you individually after the event. Also, please be sure to check out the Docs tab, where we've shared a number of resources relevant to our topic today. And finally, the question everybody asks, yes, we will be sending you a link to the recording in the next 48 hours or so. And before we jump into our discussion, I want to make sure I'm not making any assumptions about who knows who and who knows what, and let you know who Revenera is and what we do. So Revenera helps technology vendors accelerate time to value and monetize what matters. Our solutions help you drive top-line revenue with modern software monetization and understand usage and compliance with software usage analytics. Our software monetization platform enables you to manage entitlements, compliance, and usage. It's deeply integrated with your quote-to-cash processes and is used as a single source of truth of what is owned versus what is being used. We're instrumented into your applications and enable license and usage tracking for embedded, relevant to today's topic, on-premises, cloud, and SaaS products, SaaS and AI monetization, which of course overlaps with licensing and usage tracking, and compliance and enforcement to address piracy, overuse, and tampering. So with that context, now we can get started. So Philip and Peter, can you give everyone a quick introduction to who you are and what you do and what your companies are all about?
Sure. I'll let you go first, Philip.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Michael, for having me. Super excited about this webinar and be on stage both with you and with Peter, two people that I value very much. So really looking forward to this conversation. My name is Philip Daus. I'm a partner with Simon-Kucher. I've been with the firm for over 22 years now, believe it or not. I'm heading our office in Houston. I'm part of our technology and industrials cluster and also leading our Center of Excellence in Energy. I've been working on pricing and monetization projects ever since I joined the company, and also everything that's related, so overall commercial growth. For those of you who don't know Simon-Kucher, we are leading strategy consultancy, global, about 2,200 employees and 46 offices worldwide. We were founded about 40 years ago by a German professor and his doctoral students, originally as a pricing boutique, but since then we have ultimately expanded into everything that helps our clients grow the top line profitably, of course, and intelligently. We work across industry verticals, of course, including software, including industrials. And yeah, again, very excited to be part of the conversation today.
So I'm Peter Loft. I work for company Schneider Electric, which is a large Fortune 500 multinational specializing in energy management and automation control. I have 20 years in digital order operations, management, sales, and currently lead the development of an internal platform that supports Schneider Electric's sale provisioning of and ordering of digital products, both SaaS and on-premise. And thank you very much, Michael, for giving me the chance to talk about our experience today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. And Philip, I'll let you take control of the slides now and walk us through some of your thoughts to get started. But Peter, I know we're very much looking forward to getting your real world experience into the things that Philip shares as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I promise this won't be death by PowerPoint. It's really just 5-6 slides to set the stage. Also, already happy to enter in into the discussion. Both Peter and I were particularly looking forward to all your questions. maybe upfront, while we're even talking about this topic, this slide ultimately is a little bit of an overview of the history of software monetization. And at the same time, it also illustrates how the economic value capture has changed over time with the change of pricing models. So if you look on the left side, in the 2000s, companies were selling software as a one-off on-prem monetization. And 2010s or so, we were having this phenomenon called the cloud. Companies were migrating into the cloud and started to pay for access, Salesforce being one of the early users. And with that, all types of seat-based, user-based subscription models popped up. Then companies started to get the hang on consumption-based pricing or usage-based pricing. That was around the by the end of 2020. However, you might recall something else happened in 2020, this thing called COVID. And of course, that didn't quite help with consumption. So a lot of companies already started to think about hybrid pricing models, which is something we'll cover today as well. Now, the latest trend, of course, is outcome-based pricing with the rise of AI companies thinking through how does their product offering, how does AI, how do APIs generate value from a customer perspective. However, what we currently see is not truly outcome-based, like truly the impact of this software pricing, but rather something that's kind of a prelude or precursor to that, which is a work product. And just to give you a few examples, so Salesforce actually made headlines a year and a half ago with starting to charge for Agentforce $2 for every concluded or resolved conversation, which also started to become a little bit of an industry benchmark. They since also tested some other models. So for MCP, you no longer need a seat, but it's open to everyone. So they made some strides there. Claude ultimately lowered their seat-based pricing as well, introduced usage-based pricing at API rates. Some other funky stuff they tested as well on the GBB side, which didn't turn out too well. We'll talk about that later. And then HubSpot, similar to Salesforce, pay-per-lead, pay-per-resolved. All of these are work products. So if you think of a conversation as an Agentforce, if you charge $2 per conversation, it doesn't really capture the nature of the conversation and the value that it created. Chargeflow is the only example here that charges 30% of a commission, if you will, of every invoice that they're able to actually actuate. So Chargeflow is a company that helps online retailers with difficult customers. Let's put it that way. Maybe just kind of pause here and asking Peter, where do you actually stand, and does this journey kind of replicate also Schneider Electric's journey? How much of this is part of your life?
So I would say it doesn't represent our journey particularly more than it reflects, but it certainly heavily reflects aspirations. We had we have traditionally been a discrete manufacturing hardware-centric company, and over the last sort of from the 20s onwards have been sort of moving incrementally towards being very much more digitally focused. And thus, the vast majority of our sales go through partners, or certainly a significant portion, which means that in my career, I've had lots of offer managers with products who have seen these types of things and said, we'd love to go and organize have an outcomes-based product. But as soon as you do that, the challenges to implement that successfully through a partner model, etc., are really very significant. So certainly we started very much in the permanent position, and we have just, I suppose, recently quite successfully moved to a good, better, best sort of recurrent model and as soon as we've done that, we've now ultimately moved to this consumption approach, and with that consumption, we're very much away from, I suppose, ongoing consumption versus a prepay consumption model. A, because it allows sale through partners more easily, and B, because of the industries we're in, who are very much budget kind of conscious. Our customers don't want surprises with how much something is going to cost. So that we're very much in the consumption. And then finally, we have the customer, I suppose, value type solutions, which again run into the same real thing of outcome based. It's hard to negotiate, so that's where we are at the moment. We're very much more in the straight subscription, the traditional move to subscription, and then as soon as we got there, we already needed to move to consumption. And we're anticipating with AI, which we'll get into, that constant evolution in pricing and pricing just will continue.
And that's actually a great segue, Peter, because that's ultimately also the state of most B2B companies in 2026. Just disclaimer here, this is not our data. This comes from Growth Unhinged. Those were 2 data polls from the end of 24 and the second quarter of 2026, about 240 B2B companies around their monetization model. And ultimately, what you see here is that the traditional flat fee or subscription-based pricing is on the decline. Seat-based is on decline. The only bar that's going up here is pure-based model is outcome-based, but ultimately it's a little bit camouflaging the fact that overall companies are doing more usage-based and more outcome-based in form of a hybrid pricing model. And you can see that biggest bar at the bottom, that has been going up a lot. To Peter's point, pricing complexity in businesses increasing. There's a lot of transition. And once you transition from, let's say, on-prem and subscription-based pricing, you're already ready for the next step. And of course, a lot of testing on how you can implement and operationalize usage-based or outcome-based pricing model. So we also saw about 3 out of 4 companies have changed their model in one way, form, or shape over the last year. And the other thing that I thought was fascinating is right now it's the large companies that are actually the front runners. So it used to be the small startups, the VC-backed software companies that came out with these really innovative pricing models. But with the rise of AI, everybody starts to see the need. So you have to change your pricing model in order to just make up for the increase of AI costs, right? So that conversation is one that also the large companies are currently having, such as Schneider Electric.
And this I was just going to say, and this was one of the interesting bits of we see is that, as Philip just said, is there's the need to recoup AI-based costs has become, just within a year, sort of gone from very little to suddenly a very significant kind of impact on pricing strategy. But we're also seeing trends where we're going to see where we suspect that the cost of AI, as there is sort of increased sophistication in between using large language groups and small language groups, which impacts the cost, the language models, and growth and changes in the cost of computing power that you'd anticipate that comes out of all of the data centers that are currently being built all over the world. We'll see this again. The models that work now, we could well imagine that will again need to be tweaked or recalibrated, in a period of months or just a year or so, versus these long, the traditional, on-premise was good for 30, 40 years. Now we're sort of looking at changes that are vastly accelerated, which when you're all building the system that supports it, creates some real challenges to keep being able to adapt fast enough as the market evolves. Back to you, Philip.
Yeah, and at risk of stating the obvious here, right? So if you're currently a company that is happy with seat-based pricing, of course, your customers, they're all adapting AI solutions, which ultimately means that the number of users, the number of required seats will ultimately go down. Might not happen this year, might not happen next year, but it will ultimately happen. So that ultimately creates just this pressure on the traditional seat-based pricing model. Companies have to reinvent themselves, and it's very uncomfortable with lots of different work streams going on, particularly across the large software companies at the moment. Nobody is happy with their current pricing. That's I think also another fun insight. So whether you're still set on a flat fee or subscription-based pricing or pure seat-based pricing, or if you start to adopt different models, everybody's complaining about some challenges. Of course, if it's flat fee or seat-based, main challenge is the limited scalability and limited alignment with the value that you generate. But once you move towards usage-based or outcome-based pricing, either you exclude parts of the market, it might be very expensive for small and medium-sized customers, or it's difficult to forecast, or it's very difficult to explain, particularly when you have these hybrid models that everybody's jumping on. So that's one complication. Another one, just going back to the title of this webinar, is good, better, best still a viable option? So we see, and you might recall this maybe from your own journey, a lot of companies start their monetization journey on the extremes of this graph. So either they develop an offer and put it into the market as an all-you-can-eat, kind of very simple, very easy to sell, of course, very difficult to scale and upsell. Or they have the complete opposite, like this tasting menu on the right side, to build your own, very, very complex. So what companies have done over the last 10 years is they develop sometimes very sophisticated packages, the super popular good, better, best that for land and expand motion, where you have a clear upsell path, and that in theory should facilitate the sales motion. However, again, like with AI and with monetizing AI, that might not work anymore, because you have very different offerings, and then you have a bolt-on option and another option. So it starts to look a little bit more like the build your own again. And if on top of that you layer different pricing models, it becomes extremely complex, not just for the business and for the salespeople, but of course also for your customers. Now, last slide from my end, what customers are currently, what businesses are currently thinking about as kind of the holy grail, the silver bullet, are token-based pricing solutions. So token-based ultimately is where customers are able to buy upfront, or there's an upfront monetary commitment. Then that commitment gets converted into tokens, typically with some type of multiplier associated. And then customers can use these tokens variably for different functions, features, benefits. And that's kind of seen as the non plus ultra currently. And you see those growth rates over 100% projected over the next 6 to 12 months. I think that might be an interesting one to discuss jointly as well. I'm going to pause at that, but maybe Peter, do you guys think about tokens? Do you have tokens? How does that work?
I said I will take some personal credit. Within my company, I developed a voucher system which is very leans towards the token management system, and it's been massively adopted for the fact that if you can take a slide back, the Schneider Electric is a company predominantly of engineers, so our model of choice was build your own, because then we could have, we are a company of engineers who sell to companies run by engineers. So everyone wanted the exact solution that exactly met their need and price point. And this, as Philip said, meant that you needed very complex configurators and calculators and hundreds of SKUs to make a purchase, which was okay when you do this, say, once in 20 years, because this is sort of the time frame a lot of our purchases were thinking. They're energy power plants and water treatment plants, etc., etc. But then, the changes in customer, I suppose, expectations and moved to this good, better, best. And again, we started to rapidly ran into some of the problems that Philip said. Well, it's so much more simpler. It allows a good positioning, but it creates its own troubles when you are across multiple verticals like Schneider Electric is. And this is where we kind of went to the basis and add-ons. But again, selling those type of things, the explaining, making it simple, make vouchers where a relatively simple transactional purchase is made, and then customers can, in a relatively bespoke way, and probably just to make clear, only about 5% of our business is B2C. We are very much a B2B focused. Most of our stuff is not via credit cards, things like that, which is also, our customer acquisition is a lot more, I think, is much more heavier than a B2C transaction will typically have. So certainly Schneider Electric, the coupons, vouchers, tokens approach allows that consumption, while at the same time allowing a head of manufacturing, etc., to be able to control their budget and have a clear pre-purchased, an agreed purchase. Now, there's always the issues of, but what happens when they use too much and things like that, and that can lead to clearly negotiations and issues. But again, there is, with those type of things, you also start your platform. Now, my platform is ultimately developing reporting and capabilities to try and allow customers to get plenty of warning that problem is on the horizon. So a civilized discussion can ultimately be had.
Yeah. And
so Peter, that's really, sorry. It's really interesting, talking about build your own. If you're getting into different customers doing very unique things, it seems like that would make an outcome model very difficult to arrive at. But perhaps, as Philip, you were talking about earlier, a work delivered might be a little bit easier to get to, because it's less dependent on what the outcome is, what the value to the customer is, but the function that they're consuming. Does that make sense? Did you see some of that before you moved to good, better, best?
Yeah, I think the conundrum here really is that you can have very different pricing metrics living next to each other, right? So you can build a solution where you actually charge based on outcome. So if you think of automation solutions, are we able to produce faster or better or more efficiently, and kind of what's the dollar ROI that we have from that, and how can you monetize that? That would be an outcome-based model. You can have a work product kind of or consumption-based model where metrics are a little bit more difficult to capture. You can have all these metrics living next to each other because they all convert into tokens, and that's, I think, what makes token pricing so popular. Everybody can do whatever they think is the best on a pricing metric side. Of course, the challenge with that is the complexity that gets added to the business. So if this slide holds true for one metric, build your own might overwhelm customers and hinder closing because you have to explain your product offering, all the features and benefits, and it's not going to be an easy sales conversation. If you lay on top of that for each product, now you have to explain the metric and how you can purchase the tokens and how they're being consumed. And the uncertainty also that gets introduced and the difficulties in planning for budget, it's not making life for customers necessarily easier. Could make it cheaper, could make it more expensive, but I think that's why everybody's saying, but solve some of my problems, but all of a sudden I have a few additional to deal with.
As far as good, better, best goes, we've talked to companies all the time, and some of the things they're talking about are good, better, best, but sort of a hybrid spin on it, where it's good, better, best, and it does align to functionality, but also good, better, best in the number of tokens that they're offering for consumptive models. Are you seeing that as well? And what are your thoughts on that?
So I think the challenge with the tokens typically is just generated by the pricing model itself. So you have to really think about what happens in case of overusage, what happens in case of underusage, right? Underusage, generally, if customers are paying for it, is a little bit less of a problem because it allows you to make more money. The overusage is a concern because it might deter customers from actually buying into your new pricing model, right? So you really have to think through kind of how do you want to deal with this? Do you have customers just forgive overusage and you both figure it out over time? Do you make them start a new contract? Do you think about a true up? Do you offer the purchase of additional usage? So that is something where you potentially have some friction as you transition the pricing model, and that's something to also plan for and figure out up front.
So one of the things where the Schneider Electric journey is when we introduce tokens, vouchers, they're ultimately for our partner network, and ultimately our sales, they were a brand new concept. We traditionally just sent licenses, Revenera licenses out, and that was it. So we, one of our biggest focuses was Philip's example of the underusage, because we would send vouchers and we had a definite concern that at the end customers weren't actually getting them, or if they did get them, they wouldn't know what to do to claim them. Which, if you're selling a recurrent product and the customer isn't actually going and starting the usage, it's very hard to convince them to renew. So our biggest effort, the current, I suppose, one of our biggest efforts is around following up with partners and customers to utilize, to convert their tokens into functioning services, which then we have obviously a sales opportunity, a long-term sales opportunity to maintain. But again, I do 100% agree with Philip that this is a better problem than overusage, and not controlling that.
Well,
yeah.
and
maybe
Philip, you
piggybacking on your comment there.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to piggyback on this comment there a little bit, right? Because particularly when you switch from like a seat-based pricing or subscription pricing to something that now entails outcome or usage-based, it's not just a change in the pricing model, but it's ultimately also a fundamental shift in your overall business model, because literally everyone plays a role in customer success, right? Because ultimately your customers make a purchasing decision whether they want to adopt your product on a daily basis, right? That's the token consumption. So, and if you don't drive that, if you, for example, are not really good at onboarding, explaining how to use the product, then of course the model itself won't help you. And there are other things in that context, like how do you monetize your sales reps, for example? What is the incentive plan, things like that you just have to consider in the periphery as well when you transition to a new pricing model that includes tokens.
And it makes me think, one of my favorite topics, stakeholder alignment. None of this gets done in a vacuum. Peter, I'll start with you. What challenges did Schneider face when you're making that move towards hybrid models, organizational, technical, commercial? How much stakeholder alignment was required, and how did those conversations go? And can you share who functionally was involved in some of those decisions?
So one of the big, my organization within Schneider Electric, which is 50, 60 people, is one of our major missions was simply attempting to work with the business to get it to increase its maturity to understand some of these concepts and implications. In fact, one of Schneider Electric on, I suppose, failures, which would resonate with Philip, because again, this was one of the reasons Simon-Kucher, there was extensive contact in the European part of Schneider Electric between our two companies, is a really obvious outcome based for Schneider Electric, because we specialize in energy management and sustainability, is going, hey, use our systems and we'll reduce your energy management, your energy costs. Very measurable, terrific. And it's worked really well for the first year, whereupon you go and save a whole amount of energy. And then you're now each year effectively getting energy reduction becomes increasingly harder, and the value becomes less. And from what starts as a very successful engagement, a mutually successful engagement model, rapidly becomes, stops being. So real maturity and thought about what are the actual pricing and financial implications of the outcome, and is it eventually turns into a zero-sum game. Yeah. And that was, I'd say, just from a example. So that's it. But we have we have an office within our organization. We have a offer onboarding who is ultimately explaining to teams moving from permanent to recurrent the implications on their choice of commercial references, how they integrate the product with, because again, going back to something I mentioned, it's the integration of an ordering process that is required every year or every month is vastly different than one that you have one experience in the entire life of the product. You had better make that as friction-free as possible. Otherwise your pricing can be great, but if it's just a pain to get, your customers are going to find that difficult to deal with, which isn't something neither when you're used to permanent transactions, you're used to even having that as a question, I suppose, let alone a critical one. We have a licensing, we have a special group to go and work with offers to go and utilize a standard licensing solution provider, which is Revenera. We have a team ultimately looking at setting up products successfully. So you really have, now we're obviously at a very large scale, but ultimately Philip, I think made the question, everyone contributes to customer success. So you have to, when you're doing this, it's not just, I get a thing and we're there. You want to be thinking really from a end-to-end customer life cycle experience and try and tick off as many boxes to get that whole end-to-end experience making sense commercially, customer experience wise, etc. Because again, you can also have a great product, but if your sales teams are all aligned to sell permanent one-off products, then again, you are going to struggle to be successful. That would be my. I hope, Michael, that kind of covered some of the.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And we're coming up on time, but I did have one sort of last question for both of you. But Philip, we'll start with you since you said it. You said nobody's happy with their pricing. How much of that do you think is a function of how quickly things change these days? And what are some of the biggest disconnects that you're seeing between pricing models and customer value? And what advice do you have for people to avoiding those disconnects?
I think people underestimate the time it takes not just to develop your new pricing strategy and your new pricing model and calibrate that correctly. I think that piece, if anything, is somewhat understood. Pricers are becoming much more knowledgeable and professional, but I do think where folks still massively underestimate the the change management is when it comes to customer migration. So particularly in the B2B space, right? Because if you approach your largest key account and say, look, we have this fantastic new pricing model. This is how you pay. And A, you're going to have budget uncertainty. And B, I'm going to charge you 30% more because it's how we calibrated our model. You're not going to get a happy reaction. And you might just not be able to pull it through. So really thinking through in detail the entire migration plan. So what are your high-risk customers? Who with a new model would get a massive price increase? Who would get a price decrease and happily walk away with it while you're still trying to get other customers to pay more for your products? Those are things that you need to hash out. So really coming up with a migration strategy and on a product per customer level, thinking through your migration plan. How long does it take? What are the different phases? How are you going to pay not just your salespeople, but your entire customer success team to help with price model adoption? Those are things that I think a lot of companies completely underestimate.
Yeah. And interestingly, we had Chris Rommel from VDC on with us recently, and he shared some of his research that showed I think it was 40% of companies that he surveyed, it took more than 3 months to implement pricing changes. Which I think also speaks to your ability to, once you make those decisions that are very hard to make, the ability to implement them because you have commercial entitlement management, software monetization platform. The whole picture really sharpens in focus, I think.
I mean, 3 months seems fast to me. I'm here in Houston, a lot of energy companies, and it's a very conservative industry that's focused on safety.
Yes.
So any change that you bring up, it's typically a year-long migration journey, not one of several months. But again, like something just to keep in mind.
Well, and that's a great point because I think the news does focus on Salesforce changing pricing every 3-4 times a year. And it does sort of set expectations somewhat, I think, in terms of both from the people making those changes and the people receiving those changes. Peter, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Look, I think Philip's comment, I would say 3 months, turnaround. That's more a B2C or a very focused product. When you have a lot of different products in your portfolio, I think 3 months is truly an amazingly good benchmark if you can make. Because on the other bit, which I think was Philip, I would agree is for multiple years, Schneider Electric imagined, I suppose, a solution without really understanding its customer base. It imagined and its solution ultimately hinged on finding new customers who wanted to transact in a different way, and this is just very hard to succeed with. And we've had, a while ago we ultimately changed. We realized, I think, that was a flawed strategy and adjusted. So indeed, the vouchers, the token concept was one of the elements of that, but there's multiple other changes which went and ultimately aligned our process and pricing to something that was made it accessible to our existing customer base. And while there is a discussion about, it's gone up a little bit or it's gone down, etc., that is less impactful, I would say, than, hi, you now can't do business the way that we are going to tell you how you want to buy from us, versus we are going to adapt our offer so that it is accessible and easy for you to purchase. And thus, the discussion is about products and the value we add versus the first impression is, God, it's hard to do business with you. So that to me is
never a good thing.
Keeping your customer very much in the front is a good idea. All right.
Philip, any final thoughts?
I love that, actually, as a final thought. Start with your customers, right?
Okay.
So don't start with your pricing strategy. Understand your customers, do your segmentation work, do your homework. I think that's a fantastic final thought.
Yep. aligning price with value is always critical and always a big challenge. Philip and Peter, thank you so much. I always love having conversations with you, having conversations to get ready for these events. And then I suspect the audience felt similarly, even though I think you must have answered a lot of their questions because it was a little quiet in the chat this time. But thank you as well to our audience for joining us today. If you think of questions after the fact that you're too shy to ask during the session, please be sure to reach out to us after the webinar today if you have any questions. So Philip, Peter, thank you again. And thank you to everybody for joining us. And we will see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.